One morning, I woke up to the sound of footsteps moving slowly coming from the living room of my house in rural Montana. I thought it was a dream at first. The house was more than 80 kilometers from the nearest town, and no one had visited me for weeks. But the footsteps didn't stop. They moved from one side of the room to the other, stopping occasionally, as if someone were there, listening. I grabbed my cell phone and looked at the security cameras I had installed outside the house. All the cameras showed the same thing. The property was completely empty, but the footsteps inside the house continued. Hello, little ravens. Tonight's archive contains 3 paranormal accounts from isolated homes, places where help was far away, and whatever was inside the house wasn't supposed to be there. Like this video and subscribe for more stories creeping. Let us go. I bought the house because of the silence. It sits almost 40 minutes outside a small town in northern Montana, surrounded by pine trees and long empty stretches of land. At night, there are no passing cars, no nearby neighbors, and the only sound you usually hear is wind moving slowly through the forest. After living most of my life in the city, that kind of quiet felt peaceful. The house itself was small but comfortable, with a narrow hallway connecting 3 bedrooms and a living room that faced the dark tree line behind the property. One of those rooms was a guest bedroom at the very end of the hallway. I rarely used it, and when I first moved in, I left the door open most of the time so air could circulate through the house. For the first few months, nothing strange happened. My routine was simple and predictable. I worked from home during the day, cooked dinner in the evenings, and spent most nights reading quietly before going to bed. Then one night around 2 in the morning, I woke up to the quiet sound of a door gently clicking shut somewhere down the hallway. It wasn't loud, but it was clear enough to pull me out of sleep. At first, I assumed it had to be the wind or the house shifting slightly during the night. But when I stepped into the hallway and turned on the light, I immediately noticed something unusual. The guest bedroom door was closed. That caught my attention because I clearly remembered leaving it open before going to sleep. I walked down the hallway and slowly opened the door to check inside the room. Everything appeared completely normal. The window was shut, the curtains were still, and the small wooden chair in the corner hadn't moved. After standing there for a moment, I left the door open again and returned to bed. The following night, the same thing happened again. Around the same time, I woke up to that same soft sound of a door quietly closing somewhere down the hallway. When I checked, the guest bedroom door was closed once more. This time I stayed in the hallway for a few seconds before opening it, listening carefully to see if I could hear anything moving inside the room. The entire house was silent. After that night, I decided to run a small experiment. Before going to sleep, I closed the guest bedroom door myself to see if anything would happen during the night. For several nights, nothing unusual occurred. Every morning, the door was still closed exactly the way I had left it, and eventually, I convinced myself the earlier sounds were probably caused by air pressure inside the house. Then one night I woke up again, but this time the sound was completely different. Instead of a door closing, I heard something slowly dragging across the wooden floor down the hallway. The noise was quiet but clear, like the leg of a chair scraping slowly across the floor. It lasted only a few seconds before stopping completely, leaving the house silent again. I sat up in bed listening carefully, waiting to see if the sound would return. The noise had come from the direction of the guest bedroom at the end of the hallway. After about a minute, I got up and walked slowly into the hallway. The guest bedroom door was still closed, but something about the hallway immediately felt wrong. The air felt colder than usual, and the silence inside the house felt heavy, almost like the atmosphere had changed somehow while I was asleep. I opened the door slowly and turned on the light inside the room. At first, everything looked exactly the same as before. Then I noticed something in the center of the floor. The small wooden chair that had been in the corner of the room was now pulled several feet away from the wall. I stood there staring at it, trying to remember if I had moved it earlier without realizing it. But I almost never entered that room, and I knew for certain the chair had been against the wall when I went to sleep. That was the moment I decided to install a small security camera in the hallway facing the guest bedroom door so I could see if anything moved during the night. For the first 2 nights, the camera recorded nothing unusual. The hallway remained empty and the door never moved. But on the 3rd night, something appeared on the recording that I still cannot explain. At exactly 2:17 in the morning, the camera shows the guest bedroom door slowly opening by itself, moving only a few inches before stopping, as the empty hallway remains perfectly still. The door stays slightly open for almost a full minute while the camera continues recording the quiet corridor and the dim light coming from the hallway lamp. Then the door begins to close again, but it doesn't move smoothly. It shuts in slow, uneven movements, pausing every few inches as if something inside the room is carefully pulling it closed. When the door finally clicks shut, the hallway remains completely empty. No one enters the frame, and nothing else moves in the recording. I watched the footage several times before I finally noticed the detail that made the entire situation much worse. The door wasn't opening toward the hallway. It was being pulled open from inside the guest bedroom, which meant that whatever moved that chair earlier that night was already inside the house. After that, I put the house up for sale and moved to another state. The silence wasn't good for me. Encounters like this are what make isolated homes so unsettling. When you're miles away from anyone else, even a small sound can feel impossible to explain. If you're enjoying these real paranormal testimonies, consider liking the video, subscribing to the channel, and sharing it with someone who enjoys realistic horror. And stay with us, because the next account in tonight's archive is even more disturbing. The house where this happened sits far outside a small town in northern Colorado, surrounded by open land and a thin forest behind the property. At night, the area becomes completely silent. No traffic, no nearby houses, just wind across the fields and the occasional sound of branches moving somewhere in the dark. I was staying there alone for 4 nights while a friend was traveling for work. He told me the house was quiet and peaceful, and that the only sounds I might hear at night would be animals moving outside or the old wood settling. The first 2 nights were completely normal. I locked the doors before bed, turned off the lights, and the house stayed silent, except for wind occasionally brushing against the walls and roof. Nothing unusual happened, and the place felt calm despite being far from town. On the 3rd night, I woke up sometime after 3 in the morning because I heard a faint sound somewhere inside the house. At first, it was quiet enough that I thought it might have been part of a dream or something shifting outside. Then I heard it again. A slow creak from one of the wooden floorboards in the hallway outside the bedroom. It sounded exactly like the noise a floor makes when someone carefully places their weight on it. I sat up in bed and listened more closely. Another step followed a few seconds later, then another. The footsteps were slow and deliberate, moving gradually down the hallway toward the bedroom where I was sleeping. The steps stopped directly outside my bedroom door. For several seconds, nothing happened. The house became completely silent again, and I sat there staring at the door, trying to decide if someone had somehow entered the house. Then I heard a soft scraping sound moving across the door itself. It sounded like fingers slowly dragging across the wood, starting near the top of the door and sliding downward toward the handle. A moment later, the door handle began to move. It turned slowly, just slightly at first, like someone testing whether the door would open. But the door didn't move because I had locked it before going to sleep. The handle slowly returned to its normal position, and the hallway went quiet again. For a moment, I thought whatever had been there might finally leave and move away from the room. Instead, I heard one final sound from the other side of the door. A slow shift of weight against the wood, like someone leaning their head or shoulder gently against the door. while standing there in the dark hallway. The next morning, I checked every door and window in the house. Everything was still locked. Nothing looked forced or disturbed anywhere in the building. But there was one thing I noticed on the hallway floor outside the bedroom. A thin layer of dust covered the wood from some renovation work done months earlier. And in the center of that dust, right outside the door, there was a single long mark. Not a footprint, not a shoe print, just a narrow line dragged slowly across the dust, ending exactly where someone would have been standing if they were leaning against the door, listening to me inside the room. I packed my things and left that same day. I told my friend, but he didn't believe me. After about 2 months, another friend told me that he wasn't answering his calls and went there to check. The house was locked, and he went to the police station. The sheriff informed him that they had received a call one night from our friend saying there was someone at the house, but when they arrived, they found no one, only the open door. 6 months passed, and he was never seen again. Some of the most disturbing testimonies from isolated homes don't involve seeing something, but hearing someone where no one should be. If you're enjoying these real paranormal accounts, take a moment to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who enjoys realistic horror. Because the final testimony in tonight's archive involves something far worse than footsteps in a hallway. Someone who looked through a window from a place where no one could possibly be standing. The house sits deep in the woods of northern Maine, at the end of a narrow gravel road that almost disappears between tall pine trees. My parents bought it years ago as a quiet escape from the city, far from neighbors, traffic, and any kind of artificial light at night. When I was younger, that silence felt peaceful and safe. But as I got older, the isolation started to feel different, especially after dark. Out there, once the sun goes down, the forest surrounds the house completely, and every sound feels closer than it should. Last winter, I stayed there alone for a few nights while my parents were traveling. The first evening was calm and uneventful, just like always. I made dinner, watched something on my laptop, and eventually went upstairs to sleep without thinking much about the isolation. Sometime around 2 in the morning, I woke up suddenly without knowing why. The room was completely dark and silent, and for a moment, everything felt normal. Then I heard something outside the house, faint but clear enough to pull my attention toward the window. It sounded like footsteps moving through the snow near the side of the house. At first, I assumed it was a deer, or maybe a coyote passing through the yard, since animals often crossed the property during winter when food became harder to find. But after listening for a few seconds, something about the sound felt wrong. The footsteps were slow and evenly spaced, with a steady rhythm that didn't match the way animals usually move. It sounded exactly like someone walking carefully across the snow. I stayed completely still in bed, listening as the footsteps moved closer. The sound traveled across the yard and along the side of the house, gradually approaching the wall beneath my bedroom window without changing pace or direction at any point. Then the footsteps stopped directly below the window. For several seconds, there was complete silence outside. I held my breath, waiting to hear the sound continue toward the back of the house like I expected it would. Instead, I heard a soft tapping against the glass. 3 slow, deliberate taps that sounded controlled and intentional. I sat up slowly and looked toward the window, but all I could see was darkness beyond the reflection of the room. After a few seconds, the tapping stopped completely. The silence returned, and then the footsteps started again, slowly moving away from the house across the yard. The sound faded as they disappeared back toward the forest behind the property. The next morning, I went outside to check the yard. Fresh snow covered the ground, untouched except for a trail of footprints coming out of the tree line. They moved straight across the yard toward the house, without hesitation. The footprints stopped directly beneath my bedroom window. After a short pause, they turned around and followed the exact same path back toward the forest. I told myself it had to be someone passing through the property during the night. The second night, it happened again at almost the exact same time. I woke up to the sound of slow footsteps outside the house, moving with the same steady rhythm. This time, I stayed completely still and focused only on listening. The steps crossed the yard and stopped beneath the window again. The silence that followed felt heavier than before, like something was waiting. Then, once again, I heard the same 3 slow taps against the glass. I forced myself to look, but the darkness outside was too thick to see anything clearly. The tapping stopped after a few seconds, and the footsteps slowly moved away from the house, disappearing back toward the forest. The third night, I stayed awake much longer than usual. I kept the lights on downstairs, trying to convince myself there was a logical explanation for everything. Eventually, I went upstairs and locked the bedroom door before going to bed. Before lying down, I checked the window carefully. There was nothing outside, just the snow-covered yard and the dark outline of trees in the distance. Everything looked completely still and empty. Around 2:30 in the morning, the footsteps returned. This time, they didn't circle the house or move along the walls. They walked straight across the yard toward my window, without stopping or changing direction. The steps stopped beneath the wall again. I stared at the glass, waiting for the tapping sound to begin. Instead, something else happened. A dark shape slowly began to rise into view outside the window. At first, it looked like a shadow moving upward through the darkness. Then I realized what I was seeing. It was a face, slowly appearing at the level of the glass, as if someone was standing outside, looking directly into the room. My bedroom window sits nearly 20 feet above the ground. There is nothing outside that wall to stand on. No ladder, no structure, no tree close enough to reach the window. But the face remained there, perfectly still. I couldn't see every detail clearly, but I could make out the shape of a head pressed close to the glass. Then the tapping started again, 3 slow taps, each one controlled and spaced exactly like before. The face moved slightly closer, as if trying to look deeper into the room. I couldn't move or look away. After a few seconds, the face slowly lowered out of view, disappearing back into the darkness below the window. A moment later, the footsteps started again outside the house. They moved away across the snow, heading back toward the forest. I stayed awake until sunrise, unable to sleep or move from the bed. Before leaving that morning, I went outside one last time. The footprints were there again, coming from the forest and leading straight to the wall beneath my bedroom window without any sign of hesitation. But this time, something was different. The trail of footprints ended exactly below the window. There were no marks leading away, no return path back toward the trees, nothing to explain where it had gone. The snow was untouched beyond that point. The prints simply stopped, as if whatever had been standing there had never walked away from the house at all. Some encounters don't end when the footsteps stop. Sometimes what's outside doesn't need to leave, because it never moved the way it should have in the first place. If you're enjoying these realistic paranormal testimonies, like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who shouldn't be watching this alone. And before you go, ask yourself this: if something appeared at your window from a place it couldn't physically reach, would you still try to explain it? Or would you stop looking outside at night? Driving alone, staying in isolated places, hearing something that shouldn't be there. Most of the time, there's probably a logical explanation. Something caused by distance, darkness, or the way the mind fills in what it can't fully see. But every once in a while, something happens that doesn't fit into anything familiar. Something that stays with you long after the moment is over, because no explanation ever feels complete. If you've ever experienced something like this, especially in a place where you are completely alone, share your story in the comments. Some of the most disturbing accounts in this archive come from people who thought nothing would ever happen to them. Which of tonight's testimonies affected you the most? And more importantly, if you were in that situation, would you have stayed or left immediately? If you enjoy realistic horror like this, like the video, subscribe, and share it with someone who shouldn't be watching alone. There are 2 more videos waiting for you on the end screen right now, and the next account might be even harder to explain.